moment I reached the bottom of the basement stairs, I slammed into something cold and hard that shouldn't have been there. It was a door, old and warped, standing where the bare concrete wall had been just yesterday. My breath caught, and I stepped back, knocking over a bucket of cleaning rags. The door's peeling paint was cracked and yellowed with age, and its rusty handle looked like it hadn't seen use in decades. The basement had never had this door until now. I was sure of it. I ran my fingers over the wood. The texture was rough and splintered, as if it had been part of the house since it was built. But the sudden appearance of an entire door frame in solid concrete made no sense. I remembered turning on the light by the laundry machines, expecting only to see the usual clutter and cold stone walls. Instead, I had found a portal to nowhere. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light or some strange hallucination caused by stress, but it was undeniably real. I circled the door, hopping to find a gap where it could have been slipped in, but the wall was seamless, except for this impossible intrusion. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst through my ribs. The basement was frigid, the old furnace coughing to life somewhere deep in the shadows. I noticed the faint smell of damp earth coming from behind the door, like freshly turned soil underground. I gripped the handle, the metal biting cold into my palm. Slowly, I pulled. The door creaked open, the sound echoing far too loudly in the silent basement. Darkness stretched before me like a black void, impossible to see past the threshold. A gust of cold air hissed out, carrying a bitter scent that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just a door to a new room, it was a passage to something else entirely, something not meant to be here. My mind fought, refusing to enter, but my feet moved forward before I could stop them. The basement stairs creaked behind me, the house settling in the falling night. My phone was upstairs, and the weak basement light didn't reach and past the threshold. The darkness swallowed me whole as I stepped through. I fumbled with my hands, searching desperately for anything to illuminate the space beyond. My fingertips brushed rough stone, not the expected drywall. The air grew colder still, filled with a faint whispering I couldn't place. It wasn't the wind or the furnace. It sounded like voices, but fragmented and barely audible, curling around the edges of my consciousness. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a harsh crack that made my skin crawl. The stale air thickened, and the whispering sharpened into unintelligible words, repeating in a loop beneath my ears. Panic twisted my throat. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped on the other side of that impossible door, in a basement that should not exist. In the faint darkness, a shiver ran down my spine as I realized the whispering was not coming from nowhere. It was numbing me, repeating my name again and again, closer and closer, as if the voices were right beside me now, waiting for me to respond. I forced myself to calm down, swallowing the lump lodged in my throat. The door wouldn't open from this side, so I had no choice but to move forward, deeper into the blackness. Every step was hesitant, each footfall swallowed by the thick, invisible air. I reached out, hands trembling, desperate to trace even the roughest outline of this space that had no business existing beneath my house. The ground underfoot shifted beneath me, soft and uneven. It felt like soggy moss, but I had never seen anything like it in a basement. My fingers brushed against walls that bent and pulsed as if the room itself were a living thing. The stone was no longer cold, but warm, almost sticky. The ceiling above seemed impossibly low, then stretched upwards like a yawning maw. I stepped back, blinking hard, feeling the room twist and distort with every moment. A low hum vibrated through the air, vibrating in my bones. It was like the basement was breathing around me, alive and aware. Panic seeped deeper into my chest. I tried to call out, but my voice caught in my throat, swallowed by the oppressive silence that pressed against me from all sides. The whispers had gone quiet, or maybe they had never stopped, and I was only now aware of the silence between them, the terrifying gaps where something else whispered just beneath hearing. I turned in a slow circle, trying to anchor myself, but the walls rippled like water. The door I had entered through disappeared from sight, swallowed into the shifting fabric of the room. The basement was no longer basement. It was a maze of shadows and shapes that defied reason. I reached for the wall, which felt like cold flesh under my palm, pulsing with a faint heartbeat. My skin prickled, hairs rising as if the darkness was breathing into me. The soft ground gave way beneath my feet, and I stumbled, catching myself on a surface that wasn't solid, more like liquid glass. My reflection shimmered and fractured, twisting my face into something unrecognizable. The light I had brought with me fractured too, growing dim and fractured, until it was no more than a dull glow barely illuminating patches of impossibility ahead. I tried to turn back, but the path I came from was gone. The room stretched in impossible directions, corners melting into one another like a nightmare landscape. The walls whispered my name again, louder this time, but they didn't sound like they belonged to the house. They sounded hollow, like voices trapped beneath layers of cold stone. I swallowed hard and pressed my back to what I hoped was a wall, fingers splayed out. The surface quivered beneath my touch, like it was alive, waiting. I realized then that I didn't just stumble into an impossible door. I had stepped into a place that altered the rules of reality. Something beyond reason that wanted me to stay, wanted me to become part of its endless distortion. A sudden cold draft wound through the space, carrying the faintest scent of decayed flowers and forgotten memories. It raised goosebumps on my arms, and I turned sharply towards the sound. In the distance, an unearthly light pulsed, dim but steady. Against all instinct, my feet moved toward it, as if pulled by a force I could not resist. As I neared, the shape of a figure began to form in the glowing haze. It was tall and thin, but shifting like smoke, impossible to focus on. The air around it trembled, and a cold dread seeped into my bones. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body betrayed me, glued to the spot by a creeping terror that felt deeper than fear, more like sorrow wrapped in menace. The whispers returned, louder now, chanting in tones that raced beyond understanding. The figure stretched out, what looked like elongated fingers toward me, each fingertip curling and twisting like the branches of a dead tree. The light flickered, and in that terrible flicker, I saw countless faces packed into the walls, staring with hollow eyes so full of pain they crushed me. Frozen in place, I realized with a cold certainty that this place wasn't just shifting, it was alive and hungry. It had already started weaving me into its endless folds, making me part of its eternal nightmare. And the worst part was, it hadn't finished with me yet. I sat against the cold, pulsing wall, trying to make sense of the shifting nightmare that had swallowed me whole. The dim glow from that twisting figure in the distance barely lit the warped room. My mind oscillated between terrified clarity and creeping fog. Then, out of the oppressive silence, came the whispers, faint at first, like secrets caught on the edge of hearing. At first, they mimicked the beats of my own panic, echoing thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. Don't move, don't trust, help me. The voices sounded fragile, almost too soft, as if they were trying to imprint themselves on my mind rather than speak through the air. I clutched my head, trying to drown them out, but their cadence matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I wasn't sure if the whispers were real, or if my mind was fracturing under the weight of this impossible place. Every time I tried to focus, the voices flared louder, repeating fragments of my memories, my childhood home, my sister's laugh, the sound of rain on the roof. But then the words twisted, becoming unfamiliar and menacing. You belong here now, the voices crooned, shifting seamlessly into one another. The walls around me seemed to pulse in response, like a living creature sensing my fear and feeding off it. I pressed my palm harder against the surface, expecting some solid relief, but the wall undulated beneath my touch. It was as if the house itself was whispering not just sounds, but my own doubts and regrets, echoing back with a venom I hadn't known I carried. I closed my eyes tightly, willing the whispers to stop, but inside my head, they only grew louder, invading my thoughts with mocking clarity. Why did you come? Why did you open the door? The voices murmured, circling me like vultures. They sifted through moments I tried to forget, pulling at painful memories buried too deep. They whispered of failures, loneliness, things I tried to hide even from myself. Opening my eyes, I glanced around, trying to locate the source, but the darkness bloomed in every direction. The basement had become a soundscape torn from my mind, every doubt and fear amplified, dripping venomously into the dark. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, swallowed by the thick air. Then suddenly, one whisper slipped through with unnerving clarity, distant, yet sharp as a blade. Why did you leave her? The words echoed, sinking into my chest like ice. There was no answer, only silence from me. The voices repeated, each time with a shade more accusation. My skin crawled as the walls themselves seemed to lean in, the very structure of the place pressing against me. The whispers weren't just sounds, they were invasive, dragging memories I'd long buried to the surface. My sister's pleading eyes, the last time I saw her before she disappeared. The door had shown up the day after I forgot to call her back. A chilling thought seized me. Was this place linking itself to my guilt? The horror wasn't just in the walls, but in the mirrors they held up to me. The voices didn't just suggest I was trapped here. They made me question who I was, if I was losing myself to the maze. In that moment, the darkness rippled again, and I saw a fleeting glimpse of something behind the whispers, a shadow shaped like my sister's face, blurred and shifting, eyes hollow but accusing. I blinked, and it vanished, replaced by that endless, oppressive black. The whispers swelled, circling faster, now overlapping, calling out my name alongside quiet laughter that wasn't mine. The basement had become a theater for my unraveling mind, its voices echoing not just from the walls, but from inside me. I tried to tear myself away, to find footing in reality, but the thin line I clung to was fracturing beneath the weight of those voices. The more I fought, the clearer the whispers became, as if they existed only because I did, feeding on my presence and weakness. Then, as if from nowhere, a new whisper threaded through the others, colder and sharper than the rest. You will never leave. I froze, the words sinking into my skin like frostbite. The basement wasn't just a place. It was a trap woven from my own fears and regrets, a voice that refused to let me forget, a darkness that waited for me to surrender. And in that endless chorus of whispers, I realized something more terrifying than any shadow or figure. The boundary between the voices and my own mind was already gone. I stood up, trembling, and took a faltering step forward. The air around me shifted again, thicker now, like I was walking through water. The faint glow that had once promised some shape to this place was dimming, evaporating into shadows that deepened with every breath I took. I reached out to steady myself against what I thought was a wall, but my hand passed through empty space. The wall had moved. The basement was growing. Panic twisted tighter in my chest as I spun around, searching for solid ground, for any familiar landmark. But the room stretched endlessly, folding into itself like a disorienting maze. The stairs behind me, I was sure they had been just steps, were now distant, swallowed by a vast dark expanse that flickered and pulsed like a living thing. I tried to pace forward, but my footsteps sounded hollow and distant, as if the floor was receding beneath me. Every direction I looked revealed nothing but impossible geometry, angles bending sharper than physics allowed, shadows stretching longer than they should, spaces doubling and folding in ways that made my brain reel. The basement wasn't a fixed place anymore. It was a boundless void that reshaped itself with cruel whimsy. I reached out again, desperate to find something stable. My fingertips brushed something solid, a pillar of warped wood twisting upward, intricately carved but grotesque, covered with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the dark. The carvings seemed to writhe beneath my gaze, their shapes shifting just out of understanding. The pillar didn't feel like part of this house. It was another layer of whatever this place wanted me to see, a monument to the impossible. Suddenly, the ground beneath me heaved like a rise in the ocean, and I stumbled to regain balance. The floor had risen and fallen in slow, sickening waves. The basement was alive, breathing and shifting, growing around me like a creature made of shadow and stone. I tried to scream, but my voice was muffled, caught in the thick air that pressed in on all sides. I turned toward where the door had been, hoping to find an exit or at least a boundary. But where the door once stood was now a yawning space, black and infinite. The walls stretched upward and outward, their edges blurring into darkness. The room was no longer a room. It was a world of moving shadows collapsing and expanding, a gnawing void without edges. The soft hum that had once vibrated faintly now became a low growl, resonating in the shapes around me, a living pulse that synced with my heart in terrifying accord. I realized then that this place knew me, knew my fears and memories, and was reshaping itself to trap me within them. The basement was not just expanding, it was collapsing inward, folding my mind into its endless maze. I stumbled backward and collided with what I thought was a wall, but it rippled like fabric. The surface beneath my palm pulsed like a heartbeat, cold and insistent. Panic surged hotter, and I yanked my hand away, breath ragged in the thickening air. The room grew louder, the growls swelling into frantic cries and whispers, as if the basement itself was calling out warnings or beckoning. Suddenly, bright cracks of light split the blackness, jagged and sharp as lightning. The walls flickered, revealing glimpses of impossible spaces, long corridors tipped sideways, staircases spiraling into nowhere, rooms with doors opening into other doors, endless layers stacked like a labyrinth. I reached toward one of the shifting doorways, but as I touched it, the space dissolved into mist, slipping through my fingers. I realized with sinking dread that every direction was a trap, every step a promise of endless wandering. The basement was growing, eating itself and everything in it alive. It was designed to confuse and consume, to twist reality until I was hopelessly lost. In the distance, I heard it, the unmistakable creak of a door opening. But it was nowhere near me, impossibly far, and yet somehow inside this growing, shifting space. A cold dread slithered through me as the whispered voices returned, now overlapping and frantic. Come back. Stay here. Don't leave. The basement pulsed around me, reshaping itself once more. The floor beneath my feet gave way suddenly, plunging me into darkness. I fell, helpless, into a void that stretched endlessly below, the whispers trailing after me like claws scraping skin. And as I fell, I realized with terror that this growing room was endless. I landed on cold, hard ground with a jarring thud, breath knocked out of me. When I opened my eyes, I found myself sprawled on a cracked, uneven floor that stretched beneath a ceiling I couldn't see. The faint, eerie glow that lit the place was casting long, unnatural shadows. I pushed myself up, heart beating fast, and looked around. The walls were covered in cracked, tarnished mirrors, their surfaces distorted and clouded like forgotten relics from some ancient place. I stumbled forward, eyes drawn to the closest reflection. But as I leaned over to inspect it, dread tightened like a vice. The face staring back at me wasn't quite right. It was me, but wrong. My eyes were two large black pools that swallowed the faint light. My mouth was twisted into a crooked, unbearable smile that felt nothing like mine. Even my skin looked off, pale and stretched too thin. The reflection moved with me, but the expression didn't change. It grinned, silently mocking the fear building inside me. I tore myself away and darted to the next mirror. This one showed me looking away, shoulders trembling, as if ashamed or afraid. But in reality, I was staring straight ahead, frozen in place. I reached out, hand trembling, but my reflection didn't move to match. It watched me like a prisoner behind glass. My breath hitched. These mirrors weren't just reflecting light. They were showing fractured versions of myself, twisted and broken. Echoes of fears I hadn't dared to face. Each reflection offered a cruel mimicry of who I was, or who I feared I could become. What had this place done to me? I moved from mirror to mirror, each image more disturbing than the last. Some showed me old and weary, eyes hollow and devoid of hope. Others depicted a version of myself mid-scream, mouth agape in silent terror. One even showed me as someone else entirely, a face obscured by shadow, but unmistakably me, wearing a grin full of malice. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I barely recognized the versions of myself locked within those cracked glass panels. Was this basement a mirror not just of space, but of my deepest fears and regrets? A whisper curled through the air, soft and cruel, as if the walls themselves were breathing the words. "Which one are you?" I staggered back and tripped over something smooth. Looking down, I saw a shattered piece of mirror at my feet. I hesitated, then flattened my palm on its jagged surface. For a moment, I saw the reflection of the room behind me, normal and unchanged. But then the shard darkened, rippling like water, and the reflection morphed again. This time, a nightmarish version of myself, eyes wild with terror, mouth sewn shut. Fear slammed into me, heavy and cold. I yanked my hand free and turned away from the mirrors, but the distorted faces seemed to press closer, their silent cries clawing at my mind. I noticed then that the floor beneath the mirrors was covered in puddles of water, dark, still, and mirror-like. I bent down and stared into one. The surface trembled, and for a heartbeat, the reflection was perfect. my face, pale but real. Then it shattered into chaotic fragments, each piece showing a different version of me from the mirrors above. The basement was no longer just a place. It was a looking glass into the parts of me I hid, those fractures of fear, guilt, and sorrow that I buried beneath daily life. And now they were all on display, glaring at me, waiting. I tried to turn away, but the reflections had become impossible to escape. Shadows within the glass bent and stretched, reaching out like fingers. I heard soft breathing behind me, but when I whipped my head around, I faced only the darkened room. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the air. A mirror near the far wall shattered completely, glass clattering to the floor. From its broken edges, a voice whispered in my ear, dry and bitter. "You are already part of us." I spun toward the sound, but the space was empty. The mirrors shimmered and rippled, alive with those fractured faces. My own reflection stared back at me, grinning wider than humanly possible. I staggered backward as the whispers swelled louder, chanting fragments of my name and my fears. The distorted reflections seemed to multiply, climbing the walls and ceiling, drowning out reason. In that moment, suffocated by the endless, shifting faces of myself, I understood the horrific truth. The basement wasn't just showing me reflections. It was gathering me piece by piece, shattering my identity, until I was nothing more than a fractured image trapped behind its glass forever. And as the mirrors closed in like a tightening noose, I felt the faintest crack inside my mind. Like the last shard of who I was beginning to splinter away into the darkness. I backed away from the fractured mirrors, heart pounding violently as the twisted reflections seemed to leer and multiply. The basement around me pulsed with a suffocating weight, as if the very air remembered every breath I'd ever taken and held it against me. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the trembling in my limbs, but a terrible realization bloomed in the pit of my stomach. The house wasn't just a passive prison. It was listening. Every shadow shifted in response to my thoughts. Every whisper grew louder when I hesitated. The walls seemed to breathe, rising and falling like a chest, sinking with my pulse. I cursed myself for the fleeting hope I had clung to, the idea that this maze was a place of stone and water. No, the house was alive, attuned to me, hunting every fear, every secret lurking inside my mind. I forced myself to focus, willing silence to enter my head. But as soon as I tried, the basement grew restless. The low hum escalated into a harsh chorus of voices, echoing my darkest doubts. They whispered of failure and abandonment, of the sister I never saved, of the lies I told myself to get through the days before this nightmare began. I saw it then, an impossible shadow curling at the far edge of the basement, coalescing as my fear fed it. It wasn't human, but it wore familiar shapes like twisted masks. My face contorted in terror, my sister's smile turned malevolent. It spoke without words, its presence pressing on every nerve and bone. The voices coaxed, taunted, "You should have stayed. You could have helped her." My breath caught in my throat as images flashed unbidden. Moments I had ignored, a call left unanswered, laughter turned to silence. The house fed on these memories, twisting them into chains wrapped tight around my ribs. I tried to speak, to deny their hold, but my voice cracked. The basement responded instantly. The ground rippled beneath my feet, like an ocean of shadows breaking free. The air thickened, squeezing the heat from my lungs. I wanted to run, but every direction warped and slipped away, corridors folding like paper. The shape of the house was my own guilt and shame, reflecting and devouring me. A sudden whisper curled in my ear, so close I could feel its breath, like frost on my skin. "What are you so afraid to face?" The question stabbed through the noise, echoing the fear I barely admitted to myself. I shuddered, realizing the house wasn't just hearing me, it was probing, reaching inside to drag out what I tried to hide. The basement knew my thoughts before I even spoke them, reflecting them back twisted and magnified until there was nowhere left to hide. I closed my eyes, desperate to stop the torment, but behind my eyelids, the shadows danced all the same. A shivering sense that the house was everywhere at once, moving with a cruel awareness unknown to anything so cold and still. The basement could anticipate my thoughts, adjust itself to trap me deeper, become the prison of my own mind, made real. When I opened my eyes, the floor before me had changed. Letters formed in the cracked concrete, glowing faintly. They spelled out my name, then a chilling phrase, "We hear you." A cold dread crept from toes to crown. The house was no longer a building. It was an entity, a predator shaped from my deepest fears, listening, learning, waiting. And from the darkness beyond the letters, a voice whispered again, low and saturated with menace. "The more you fear, the closer we come." The basement was no longer a place. It was a parasite inside my mind, gnawing at the edges of my sanity until I could barely tell where I ended and it began. Every breath I took came weighted with the sound of those whispered threats, the cruel mockery of voices that knew my darkest secrets better than I did myself. I stumbled through the endless shifting corridors, the walls undulating like lungs, drawing me deeper into suffocating madness. My thoughts snapped and splintered under the relentless pressure. I tried to hold onto the fragments of who I was, a man who had a life beyond this nightmare, memories that felt real because they were desperate anchors to something solid. But the basement twisted those anchors, pulling them apart until reality itself unspooled like broken thread. At times, I wasn't sure if the voices inside me were my own or the house. They bled together into a maddening chorus, cicadas buzzing beneath my skin. "You're useless. You left her to die. You deserve this." The phrases scrawled across my mind like jagged graffiti, each one a sharpened blade cutting deeper. I screamed internally, begging for silence, but the darkness only grew louder. I found myself in a room flooded with dim, sickly light that seemed to pulse with a heartbeat. The cracked mirrors lined the walls, but now they weren't just reflections. They were windows into nightmares that clawed and writhed. My own face stared at me from every pane, fragmented and distorted beyond recognition. And yet, each one echoed back the same expression: abject terror. Trembling, I reached toward the largest mirror, fingertips brushing cold glass that rippled under my touch. My reflection blurred, twisting into something not me, a hollow-eyed version, grinning with cold cruelty. For a moment, it lunged forward, and terror exploded through me like electricity. I stumbled back, clutching my head as throbbing waves of pain crashed through my skull. The whispers surrounded me, indistinguishable now from my own fractured thoughts. My mind frayed like a worn rope, every fiber straining to hold together. And then came the unbearable sound. A shriek slashed through the basement, harsh and raw, not from outside, but from inside me. It tore free as I slammed my fists against my temples, trying to drown out the nightmare devouring my sanity. But the scream didn't stop. It echoed and multiplied, bursting through every shadow and corner. Disoriented, I staggered and fell onto the broken floor. Hands trembling uncontrollably, I reached into my pocket for my phone, but the screen was cracked and black, dead as the basement's yawning darkness. Desperation pressed her fingers around my throat as the walls seemed to close in. Then, without warning, the space shifted violently. The floor beneath me cracked open, and ripping, bellowing laughter filled the air, not human, something monstrous and raw. The shadows grabbed at me like claws, pinning me down in their suffocating grip. "Why did you come back?" A voice hissed into my ear, fiercer and more accusing than before. I tried to answer, but found no words, only a cold void sinking into my bones, sucking out the light of reason. The basement was no longer just listening. It was inside my head, rewriting my memories, twisting my mind into something unrecognizable. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me wasn't my own terrified face, but 1,000 fractured versions staring back. Mouths all stretched into silent screams. And in that silence before unconsciousness, I understood. A part of me had already been left behind in this endless labyrinth, swallowed by the door that wasn't there yesterday. The nightmare was far from over. I woke gasping, skin slick, with cold sweat, heart hammering a desperate rhythm. For a split second, the basement, the shadows, the impossible door, all of it felt like a fatting nightmare, blurred and distant. I was back in my kitchen. The morning sun streamed through the window, soft and warm. The scent of coffee lingered in the air. Relief surged, a flood washing away the terror. I took a shaky breath, telling myself it was over. It had to be over. The basement door, the shifting space, the whispers, they were nothing but a fevered product of my unraveling mind. I moved through the kitchen, every step grounding me deeper into reality. The familiar clink of dishes, the creak of the floorboards, each sound a balm against the horrors I thought I'd escaped. I paused by the refrigerator and stared blankly at the magnet-covered surface, a collection of childish drawings and photo snapshots. This was my life. This was me. But then something odd caught my eye. A photograph laid askew on the counter. It was a picture of my sister and me as kids, smiling in happier times. But the image was wrong. Her face was blurred, smeared like wet paint, and mine seemed oddly absent, replaced with a dark, empty space that sucked in the light. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The smudging didn't fade. Chills crawled up my spine. Unease gathered like a storm inside me. I took a step back and glanced around the kitchen. Everything was just a little off, too quiet, too still. The light didn't bounce the way it should. Shadows cast strangely sharp angles where none should exist. I shuffled to the hallway and peered toward the basement door. It was closed, a plain white rectangle set in the familiar wall. But now it pulsed faintly with a soft blue light, unreal, like something from a dream. Tentatively, I reached out and touched the doorknob. It was icy cold, slipping through my fingers like liquid metal. A whisper curled through the air. Unmistakably familiar, it murmured my name, soft and insistent, drawing me closer to that threshold. I jerked my hand away, heart thrumming in panic. I told myself I was safe, that the nightmare was done. But the house had other plans. I glanced back at the living room mirror. The reflection was subtle, but unmistakable. My reflection wasn't matching my movements. It lagged behind, lingering a moment before catching up, distorting as if I was watching a poorly tuned television signal. My eyes in the glass flicked to shadows behind me, shapes shifting just out of focus. I spun around, but no one was there. The whispers grew louder. My breath quickened, and I staggered back. Then, without warning, the walls themselves began to ripple, flashing with brief images, flashbacks to that basement labyrinth, the distorted mirrors, the endless shadows. Faces pressed against glass, screaming silently. The voices screamed too, calling me deeper. Panic seized me entire. I stumbled toward the front door, desperate for escape, but it dissolved beneath my fingers, replaced by a wall of shifting shadows. No, I whispered, this can't be real. But the house answered with silence. And then, a cold smile crawling across my own reflection in the broken living room mirror. I was trapped, but worse than any basement or shifting maze. I was trapped inside a false reality, a world crafted by whispered fears and shattered memories, designed to imprison me in a lie. And as the door flickered before me, pulsing with that same unnatural light, I understood the worst truth of all. I had never left the basement. The nightmare was not behind me. It was everywhere. And somewhere, deep inside this endless maze, the door was waiting for me to open it again. I pressed my back against the cold wall, breathing ragged, eyes darting wildly in the dim, shifting light. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but no matter which way I turned, the basement folded back on itself like a twisted puzzle designed to trap me. The walls stretched farther than any house should hold, corridors bending impossibly, ceilings sinking and rising in maddening rhythm. I was trapped inside a nightmare that refused to end. I tried to steady my racing thoughts, clinging to the desperate hope that there had to be an exit somewhere. My hands trailed over the slick, strange surfaces, walls that felt alive, pulsing faintly beneath my fingers. I reached for what I thought was a doorframe and found only emptiness, the aperture dissolved, leaving seamless stone where a passageway should have been. I whispered into the darkness, "There has to be a way out." The echoes returned my words warped and hollow, as if the house itself mocked me. I paced forward, feet dragging over the warped floor. The oppressive silence pressed down, broken only by the faintest creaks and whispers alive in the walls. Shadows shifted just beyond sight. Every beat of my heart seemed to summon them closer, folding this place tighter and tighter around me. I stopped suddenly. Up ahead, a faint light flickered, pulling me toward it like a dying flame. The glow came from a door, another door, but it wasn't the one I had entered through. This one was different. Its paint was chipped, dulled to a ghostly gray, and the handle was cold and slick in my hand. I turned it slowly. Beyond the threshold lay not escape, but another endless room, vast and empty, walls stretching beyond sight. The air was thick and still, tasting of dust and forgotten memories. I stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind me, the echo ringing like a death knell. I spun, trying the handle in vain locked. My breath hitched. The room was empty, but it felt too vast to be true. Every few steps I took, the space warped, ceilings rising impossibly high or slamming down close enough to suffocate. I called out, voice cracking, but only silence answered. Fear tightened its grip. I shook my head, struggling to break free of the choking dread settling like ice in my veins. How long had I been trapped? Hours, days. Time folded in this nightmare, meaningless and cruel. I stumbled toward one wall and pressed my palm hard against the cold surface. The stone shifted beneath my touch, blotches of mirror-like sheen spreading to reveal reflected images, not of the room, but of myself. Each reflection tinted with hollow eyes, fractured expressions of despair and rage. Sick with hopelessness, I stepped back, my eyes scanning frantically for any hint of exit. But the walls were blank, indistinguishable from one another in the growing gloom. The house had swallowed me whole and spit me into its endless maze. A whisper floated by, soft and bitter. No escape. I whirled in every direction, but the air thickened, blurring my vision. I clawed at my temples, desperate to prevent my mind from splintering. But all the noise and whispering pressed in, threatening to drown out reason completely. The door behind me beside vanished, as if swallowed by the walls, leaving the room an endless abyss with no door, no window, no hint of light. I sank to my knees, chest heaving, the cold stone biting through my clothes. The basement was not just a place. It was a trap woven from my fears, a nightmare with no beginning and no end. And whatever force held me here wasn't finished. It murmured then, a voice slithering through my skull. The door will never open. I clenched my eyes shut, tears flowing freely. The labyrinth I feared had become my prison, and I was alone, lost forever in a house that was no house, trapped behind a door that was never there to begin with. The basement was a nightmare that refused to end. I sat slumped against the cold wall, breath shallow, eyes fixed on the door that hovered before me, a cruel and constant presence that had never been there before, yet never gone. Its chipped wood, stained and peeling, held the promise of escape and the certainty of torment all at once. The handle was cold and heavy in my hand, as if it bore the weight of every moment I had lost since this all began. I reached out, fingertips trembling, brushing the rough surface. The whispers stirred once more, as if the house sighed in anticipation. My mind quaked between hope and dread. Could this door really lead me back to the world I'd forgotten? Or was it just another twist in a labyrinth woven from my own fear? I pulled gently, and the door creaked open into darkness, so deep it swallowed the weak light behind me. No stairway, no familiar basement, just a void vast and endless. My heart hammered, the air thickened, and the shadows around me stirred like living things. I stepped forward, and the darkness welcomed me with an all-consuming silence. I walked, or perhaps floated, through that void. The door loomed behind me, never far, always pulsing with a faint, eerie glow like a heartbeat, slow and implacable. It was an anchor to this place, a tether that kept me bound to this waking nightmare. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into days. Or maybe there was no time at all, just an endless succession of breathless moments, each one dissolving into the next. I searched for an edge, a crack, a breath of air that might break the fragile barrier between this false reality and the truth I ached for. But the door remained, unchanging and unforgiving. Behind it, the abyss pressed closer with every passing second, whispering promises of release that only tightened its grip. In the distance, shapes flickered, faces from my past distorted and twisted, eyes hollow, mouths opening and closing without sound. They reached toward me, spectral fingers clawing at my sanity, pulling me deeper into despair. I tried to scream, but the void swallowed sound whole. I was alone, utterly and completely. Memories bled through the darkness, my sister's voice, laughter fading into silence. I saw the moments I ignored, the chances I lost. Regret became a living, breathing thing, coiling inside me like a serpent, squeezing tighter with merciless persistence. I wanted to fight it all, to reclaim what was left of myself. But the basement, the house, this endless door held me captive. My body felt unreal, my mind fractured, slipping away piece by piece into the darkness. The door whispered again, low and cruel, "You can never leave." I reached for the handle one last time, knowing what awaited beyond would not be freedom, but a continuation of the nightmare. Yet, there was no choice. The door was all I had, my prison, my tormentor, my endless fate. As I crossed the threshold, the darkness closed in completely. The door vanished behind me, dissolving into nothingness. And somewhere, in the farthest reaches of shadow, another door began to appear, waiting for the next step, the next lost soul, the next endless horror. And so I remain, forever trapped between worlds, behind the door that was not there yesterday, but is here now, waiting, always waiting for the truth to finally claim me. There is no escape, only the endless door,